Hi, I'm Murphy, and this is my channel, Murphy's Every Whim, where I talk about books, because I love to talk about books. Another thing I love is hot tea with honey. I probably love it a little too much. It is hot tea and honey weather, so. I want to talk about Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. This book took me 3 days to finish. It doesn't go that fast, but I was engaged with it from pretty much the beginning. I like Dennis Lehane. I've read several of his books. Shutter Island is my favorite. I've read it multiple times. I have the graphic novel adaptation. I've seen the movie. Of all of those things, probably my favorite is the actual book. I've read A Drink Before the War, which is one of the Kinsey Gennaro books. While I liked the characters and the mystery of it, I thought that it was maybe a little too violent for me. I've also read The Drop, but I have to admit to not remembering much about The Drop at all. Mystic River, I had put off reading for a long time because I had seen a little bit of the end of the movie, and that put me off. But I've read it now. So, what's the story? These three boys, Sean, Jimmy, and Dave. In the very first section of the book, three boys are playing, and a car pulls up, and it seems like an unmarked police car. And two men get out, and they harass the boys, and they end up taking Dave off with them, leaving Jimmy and Sean in the street. And Dave looks horrified. But at first, Jimmy and Sean think that this is the police and they're just taking Dave home. It turned out that they weren't police and they had kidnapped Dave and kept him for 3 days, and he escaped. It's never explicitly said what happened to Dave during that time, but everybody in the neighborhood assumes the worst. So then we move 25 years ahead. Sean has become a state trooper. Jimmy became a criminal, ended up going to prison for a while, but when he got out, he bought a corner store and has made a good name for himself in the neighborhood. And Dave actually in high school, Dave became a baseball star, but he's not doing so well now, has trouble keeping a job, and for most part, his wife supports the family. And the oldest daughter of Jimmy is murdered. Dave comes home that night with blood on his clothes. That's what you can get from the back of the book. So none of that are spoilers that you can't get from the blurb in the back of the book. So they're all brought together again. Sean because he's investigating, Dave because he came home with blood on his shirt, and Jimmy because it's his daughter that was murdered. I believe that Dennis Lehane is a masterful storyteller. This book is 400 pages long, and it kept me engaged. And how did it keep me engaged? By page 145, by the time that I had gotten to know all the characters, by the time that we knew the situation, knew how they all fit together, I had a list of about 8 questions that were unanswered for me. And what did Lehane do? Lehane started meting out the answers to those questions slowly over time. It wasn't like some books that I've read lately that have this point where you're just bored because the questions have been developed, but then there's a lot of just stuff before you start getting to anything that is satisfying, anything that helps you understand more about the background, that helps you understand motivations or anything. But Lehane took these questions that I had developed by page 148 And he started answering them little by little by little. And that kept this book from ever having any of those boring parts. There were parts that just seemed a little repetitious, but that's sort of the nature of a criminal investigation, that somebody's got to come back and ask questions, come back and ask questions, come back and ask questions. That did seem a little repetitive, but every time there were questions asked, more information came out or the situation changed. I enjoyed this book a lot. I think Lehane is like I said, a masterful storyteller in that it grabbed my attention, built up tension, and then meted out little bits to go along for the rest of the book to help me stay engaged, to help me learn more and more about the backstory. The ending was satisfying. I actually thought that Lehane was setting it up for a sequel. That I always find a little disappointing, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was just telling us a little bit of what people's lives were going to be like going forward. I recommend Dennis Lehane's Mystic River. If you haven't read it or haven't seen the movie, definitely, if you haven't seen the movie, read the book. Of the little bit of the movie I've seen, even though it had all these great stars in it and was directed by Clint Eastwood, even without seeing it, I think the book is better. So, I'm going to sit in front of the fire, finish my tea, and hope that the sun comes out sometime this afternoon. All right, take care. A suburb of Massachusetts, sorry. Everything like that. That was a cop-out, wasn't it? Some cop-out language, I call it. But,